Due to being recorded in 2 sessions, there are a couple of microphone changes in this episode. Hello and welcome to the Wormhole Podcast, episode 75, bringing on an author and talking with them in detail about one, occasionally more, of their books. I'm Charlie Place, and today I am joined by Ronali Collings. Her debut was published last year and it totally rocks. It's really, really good. We will be talking about it today. It's called Love and Other Dramas. It focuses on 3 women: Tanya, who is in her 40s, newly divorced and wanting to find herself after having been a daughter, a wife and a mother for so long; Priya, who has been working in banking for years and years without being promoted, probably because she's a woman from an ethnic minority background who has dared to stick up for herself. And we've also got Helen, Tanya's mother, who since the death of her husband is changing and becoming her own self. Let's get to it. Hello, Ronali.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you very much for having me on.
It is wonderful to have you on. Oh my goodness, your book is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I will have to start with the background before you published the book. Bernadine Evaristo is one of the names in your acknowledgements and used in the marketing, and you did an MA with her. I'm going to have to ask about your MA first.
Yes, well, I really worked with Bernadine towards the end of my master's because I was a mum. I still am a mum, but I had smaller children at the time. I did it over 2 years. So it was really in the second year that I met her. And it was for the dissertation part of my master's where you actually start writing the book. I actually got her as my supervisor by chance, as usual. My friend and I are both middle-aged women, one of 3 of middle-aged women on the course at the time. And we were sitting at the back and someone was assigning us supervisors. And they just forgot about us. We were just like invisible at the back of the room. So I put my hand up and said, "What about us?" And the guy who was assigning people, he said, "Oh, well, why don't you just go to this room? Because I think there's only 3 people in that room. So you can join that." So my friend and I went along and we opened the door and there was Bernadine. We were like, "Result, that's brilliant. This is fantastic." And I thought that it was going to be nice and easy. But actually, she's quite challenging in a very nice way. So the first thing that I wrote for her, was really proud of it, thought it was really great. And she just handed it back and she said, "That is not your voice." And I went, "But what is my voice?" And I truly did not understand what it was at that stage. So I went back and tried again. Then I gave her a story that I'd written in the first year where someone had said it was so good it could be published. And she just went, "Nah, that's not your voice either." And I tried again and just relaxed basically and just wrote from my heart. And suddenly my voice came out, or something vaguely approaching my voice. It still wasn't quite there. There was still quite a bit of formality. And she was so encouraging from that stage onward. She really took a huge interest in helping me to develop my story, to help me to write better, to think about language. But really, I think where she helped me the most was about character and the importance of character and how you honestly cannot write well or this type of book well if you don't know your characters from the inside out, what motivates them, who they are, who their families are, what shaped them, what kind of music they like, what kind of books they read, what kind of films they might watch, because their story really comes from who they are. So that's a lesson that I took forward and used in the book that I wrote now. Yeah, so I did that. And then she also asked me to do a PhD. So I started doing that. That coincided with a very difficult time in my life. And I've talked about it in my author's note at the back of the book. And it was really a time when my children were starting to grow up. And I started to look for who I was. And I couldn't find that person anymore. I had really lost myself in my children and in my marriage. And I really didn't think about myself. The only thing I did for myself was the master's and the PhD. And I had to really take a look at why I was doing a PhD. And once I realized that it wasn't for me and that it might have been for my parents or for Bernadine or for the actual doctor title to add to the qualifications, I realized that that wasn't something that motivated me or my life or wasn't motivating anymore. and I had to pull out of my PhD. So you would think that would be the end with Bernadine, but she's such a supportive, kind person. She's like this with most people that she works with as students. I've kept in touch with her ever since, and I'll meet up with her occasionally for a coffee or talk to her on the phone. And she's been hugely supportive and gives really good advice on how to manage this really difficult business.
Fantastic. So has she read the book? I'm guessing yes.
She has read the book. It's not her kind of book because she's literary and I write commercial fiction, but she said she enjoyed it. So she was either being very polite and lying, or she was telling the truth. I don't know. I'm sure she kind of enjoyed it. She knew what to expect from me, really, because of the way that I'd written in the past. So she knew I wasn't going to be writing anything like her books.
Wonderful. And yeah, you say about working with her to develop characters and thoughts. I mean, that just shines through in your book so much. I just haven't felt quite the amount of feeling I had for characters in a long time reading your book. And yeah, it's just phenomenal. It really, really works.
Oh, thank you very much, Charlie.
Oh, I love it. I'm really looking forward to your next book. Oh my goodness, am I looking forward to it. Okay, we'll get on to the book itself then. So after everything here we've just talked about, can you tell us your reason for writing it, your inspiration, that sort of thing?
The book really started when I was writing my dissertation. I wanted to write about a marriage, and I wanted to write about an interracial marriage, which is what I have. It's what I live every day. And I was struggling because I started at the wrong point and I was focusing on the wrong thing. And I initially started by looking at the divorce of Tanya and Stephen. And there was really nothing new there that I was bringing to that party, because so many people have written books about breakups and they've done a much better job than I was doing. And there wasn't much mileage in it. And then I started thinking about something else and thought to myself, you know what, I think maybe writing is not for you. You might be a much better reader, and it's better if you go off and cheer on all your friends who are doing really great jobs with their books and just read. You're much better at that. And then Bernadine's book, Girl, Woman, Other, came out, and I gave a copy to my mum, and my mum and I both read it, and we both related to two different characters. And I thought, wait, there's something there in the two different generations and our way of looking at the world, because I've been brought up by this woman, but I have a very different view of the world to her. And I began to realize that the story really wasn't in the marriage, it was in the relationship between the mother and the daughter. And I had always had the best friend in the other book. And I thought, well, that might be quite good to look at that difference as well, because a lot of people don't see the difference in culture really between people who are of Indian heritage and Sri Lankan heritage, and particularly a Sri Lankan who's also a Christian. They're very different types of people. And I wanted to show the different types of stresses that you have depending on what your cultural background might be. And then I thought, well, actually, this might work, these three women. Let's have a go. And I sat down and thought, what kind of things in somebody's life would make them want to change or would force them to change the type of person they are and to develop into this next stage of their life? And I thought, well, divorce is one of them, and maybe death. And then for Priya, I was thinking, what would affect this woman? And I thought, well, if your whole identity is wrapped up in your job, not going anywhere with that job and doing something really career limiting, like the outbursts that she has in the office, would have a massive impact on her. And she'd have to reevaluate her life and the choices that she's made in her life. And I sat down one day and wrote the party scene that's at the beginning of the book. And I thought, my God, actually, that's my voice. And it was something I hadn't seen on the page in all the years that I've been writing, because I always thought writing is lots of description and I must set the scene and I must sound like a writer. And really, that's not who I am. And a friend of mine who was on the masters with me had said to me, you know, Ronali, you should just write how you speak. And I did. And suddenly there it was on the page, and it was much more engaging than anything else that I've written in my life. And I thought, I've got something here. So I proceeded with that. And then I saw a tweet for the Madeleine Milburn Literary Agency where they were starting a mentorship scheme for underrepresented writers, or at least it's underrepresented now. It was everybody back then. So I've got nothing to lose. And they didn't need you to have a completed novel. And I didn't. I had like 15 to 20,000 words. And I sent it off. And I think it's the first time in my life again where I have felt confident in something that I've written. Everything else where I've submitted to a competition, I have thought, well, probably won't have much of a chance, because I kind of knew it wasn't quite there. It wasn't quite me authentically as a writer. And this time I thought, actually, I think I've got a good chance. This is pretty good. And yet, there's always that voice at the back of your head that says, those people are going to apply. There's going to be loads of people who will appeal more than this drivel that you've written. But I got an email saying that Hayley had loved my characters, and I was completely overjoyed. And from then on, I worked with her to develop the rest of the book. So she let me go off and write it. And she came back. I sent it to her, and she said, well, you need to fix this, this, and this. And then I fixed it. And we kind of kept going through, trying to bring the story out a lot more and make it more commercial. And I learned a huge amount from working with Hayley. And yeah, one day this book emerged that was actually pretty decent, and I'm very pleased with it. So yeah, that's how my book started.
Pretty decent. It's an understatement of the year. Well, yeah, you say about making it more into commercial fiction. Were you still at that point then, I suppose, possibly writing more literary?
Yes, absolutely. I was still sort of writing in that style that I wrote with Bernadine, and it wasn't quite working. And also there's certain things with commercial fiction, you really don't need to describe everything, and you can leave the reader's imagination to fill a lot of those gaps in, and you don't tend to describe people as much. I never do. It's not really something that I enjoy doing. I'd rather let someone imagine what a character looks like anyway, based on the way that they live in the world. And it was about pacing, really, and plot and structure, things that you don't concentrate on really when you're writing literary fiction, because plot is not a big deal and pacing is not really that important. So for me, it was a huge learning curve to think about beats. And I had done a screenwriting course, so it wasn't completely alien to me, but to think about story beats and development. And for me, the biggest issue I found was 3 women and trying to convey their stories as well as possible within the constraints of about 340 pages, 80,000 words, is quite difficult when you want to give them all quite a rich story arc. So that was really the biggest challenge for me.
Well, you say about the 3 characters. I feel like we need to introduce these different characters properly, more than I could ever do. Can you tell us about Tanya, Priya and Helen as people and that sort of thing?
So Tanya is probably the closest to me. I'm not Tanya. I haven't been in the position that she's been in terms of the divorce and so on. But I have been in the position of Tanya in having had a professional job, having left that, partly my choice, partly not my choice, to look after my kids, and losing my identity as a person because of that. So Tanya is that person. She's married to an English guy, a white English man, Stephen, or she was married to him, and they've recently got divorced because Stephen had an affair with somebody that he worked with. And they have 2 children who are grown up. One is 18 and one is 20. And Tanya is going back to work after so many years of not working. And she started a life as a lawyer, and she doesn't know how to do anything else. So she's starting again, which means that she's starting with all the trainees at work when she's the same age as many of the partners at work. And that's a very difficult dynamic to manage. And I think it's very difficult for women to re-enter the workplace once they've left. I was very keen to write about older women. So I really wanted to talk about a woman who was in her 40s. I think we go through very different challenges. I'm now in my early 50s. And I think there's a huge adjustment, really, as your kids get older and as you get older. I think there's a misconception that women have their lives mapped out and they're all sorted once they get past their 30s. everyone talks about, oh, you look fabulous at 40 and I'm fabulous and I do this, that and that. I would say most of us don't have things sorted. It is very difficult. We're still discovering who we are. And often our identities have been subsumed by things like work and motherhood, or responsibilities caring for other people like your parents or for relatives. And I think it's important to show through a character like Tanya that can leave you making some really stupid decisions in your life. And you can see from the first chapter of the book that Tanya has made a really stupid decision to continue sleeping with her ex-husband by blurring those lines of that relationship that she has with him. And then Priya is Tanya's best friend, who she's known since they were 4 years old. And Priya is of Indian heritage, whereas Tanya is of Sri Lankan heritage. And Priya has lots of brothers, big family, lots of family here in the UK, whereas Tanya doesn't. Tanya just has one brother and her parents in the UK. There's no mention of anybody else, whereas Priya has a huge extended family. And that actually is reflective of my circumstance. Most of my Indian friends have a lot of their family here. I have no one except my parents, and I have one parent. So I have had no other family members live here. So Priya's an investment banker, and she is hugely career driven, and she doesn't do relationships, she says. And that is because when she was quite young, she did as her parents wanted and married her boyfriend from university. And that didn't work out because of the demands of her job and his expectations. They didn't really match up. So she's decided that she doesn't do relationships. She's fairly promiscuous. I don't like the use of that word, to be honest. I feel it has a lot of judgment attached to it. But let's just say she just enjoys a healthy sex life with various partners. And she's very outspoken. She's adapted her personality to her environment. So working in an investment bank, which is typically a very masculine environment and quite an aggressive environment, particularly on a trading floor, she's outspoken and almost rude, almost to the point of rudeness. And she's expecting to get a promotion that she's worked for many, many years. And she finds that the bank has appointed somebody else who's coming in from the US. And she has a huge outburst at work, which puts her career in serious jeopardy. And then there's Helen, who is Tanya's mum. She's in her mid-60s and she's a recent widow. Her husband died about a year earlier. And since her husband's died, she has sold the old family home, moved into her own flat, furnished it in really modern furniture that she didn't have in the last house. Her previous house was filled with knickknacks that they accumulated throughout the whole term of their marriage. And this new house is just pared down and modern. We start the book with Helen's housewarming. And Helen has also morphed outwardly into a different person. And then she's there at this disco housewarming with her hair in a bouffant with loads of glitter on it and a glitter jumpsuit and platforms. And she's the ultimate hostess. And she's a complete stranger to her daughter, who's not known this woman. Her mum has been almost drab in her appearance and withdrawn, and she's just been a mum to her. And she hasn't seen this side of her mother ever. So Helen is like a different person. So Tanya doesn't know how to react to her. And Helen is really just trying to reclaim an element of herself, much like her daughter, but in a slightly different way. She's trying to have something left of her life. But Helen's quite different to her daughter in terms of her adherence to religion. Religion is a huge part of her life, and she's a Roman Catholic, as indeed is my mother. And it's how that shapes the way that she manages her life. There's that, and there's also the society that they live in, where that matters to them, matters to that generation hugely. So it matters to Helen what people think of her.
Do you have a favourite character?
I would say that my favourite is probably Priya. And I think it is because I had the most fun writing her, because she is not like me at all. And I loved the freedom of writing as somebody else.
I think I was expecting you to say Tanya almost.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Tanya, if I knew Tanya, I'd probably want to give her a slap, to be honest. She's quite annoying. She makes stupid decisions. And I'm hoping that readers will like that as well when they're reading the book. And they're going, come on, what are you doing?
Well, okay, you say that. I'll bring it in now. I'm absolutely yes. That's exactly. Although I was thinking, Tanya, what are you doing? I was more just thinking about Stephen and like, please, Stephen, just go.
Yeah.
Given that then, and given you've talked about the first kind of drafts of the book that you were talking about Tanya's marriage and stuff, did I hear rightly on another show that you said you liked Stephen as a character?
I did. Yeah. I suppose I'm one of these people who tries to see people as whole rather than just the one thing that they've done that's bad. And I do feel that I know a lot of men like Stephen who are going through this period in their lives where, we all change. I think midlife is quite a difficult adjustment to realise that you're not young anymore. And I felt that he was coming from a place where he does love his wife, his ex-wife. And I think marriages, long-term relationships, they can go through these times where one or the other of the people in the marriage can feel that they're ignored, or that their partner has their focus entirely on something else, whether that's work or children or some other caring responsibility or something else. And I think that Stephen is just one of those people. And I think he's probably just looking for attention that he doesn't get from Tanya, because Tanya's whole life has been about their kids and managing a relationship with her parents. And I think there comes a point in a lot of marriages where you have to adjust that. So, yeah, I didn't particularly dislike Stephen. No.
I can definitely see where you come from, and you're the writer as well, so I will completely respect that. But yeah, given all that, even with all that, I'm still finding it difficult to not just find him so annoying.
He does. I did make him a bit more annoying, I think, because I rewrote that whole Christmas episode, and I think probably my opinion of him was on a previous draft of it. But I can honestly say, if that Christmas episode had happened to me and I had a Stephen in my life, I would not want to talk to him again. So I think I made him a lot worse as I redrafted. So he did get a lot worse. And so in that respect, yeah, I don't think I would put up with a bloke like him in real life. But still, I don't think he's necessarily just a bad person. He's just an idiot, But
true.
Some people are.
It's good you stopped where it was then. Otherwise, who knows where it could have gone. I suppose, talking with Stephen, talking of Tanya, and you've got Joe, who I was really excited to see the introduction of and thought, oh, this could be good. And then it doesn't happen. So I actually wanted to ask you why Tanya doesn't have a romantic ending. Was it important for her to stay single?
It was. It was really important for her to stay single, because I think at that point of her life, her whole life had been about everybody else. And then Joe was great. And I wanted Joe there to give her some kind of sexual liberation as well, and to allow her to enjoy herself in a way that she hadn't done for many years now. I needed her to be single at the end because I wanted her to explore the dance studio and that aspect of her life, and not just go from one relationship to the next. I think often people need to heal from a big relationship, like a long-term marriage like that. I also think that the way that I wrote Joe, he had his own hang-ups and he had his own issues, and that was not the right relationship for her. And it's that cliche, isn't it, that the rebound is never the one that works, and that's not true. But in this particular case, it was true for them. It wasn't right for her to end up with somebody else. Anybody, even someone as great as Joe, it wasn't right for her.
No, that's a good point what you said. And I think in the context of the book, obviously we don't know exactly how many days have gone past or whatever. She does end up with Joe quite quickly. At the same time, I suppose I was also thinking, it seems perfect. It's the second chance at love for Joe, who had liked her in the past. But no, I totally liked how you ended it. Is it possible then that kind of off the page, after the ending, Tanya might find someone?
Yes, I think so. I think the problem with Joe is that, as you say, Joe had known her when she was young. I mean, we're not the same people. So meeting her again in her 40s, that's not the same person that he knew when she was 17. She's been through an awful lot. She's changed. And so he would have not had a very current view of the person that she is now. She knows that. And also there was just an element of her needing to just explore things a bit more and be herself. So yes, I think she will end up with somebody after the end of the book. And there was a point where I toyed with her getting back together with Stephen.
So glad you didn't.
Well, that's what my agent said to me. No, don't do that. Because I've seen that happen. But fiction isn't supposed to be real, is it? And I really wanted her to be liberated. And I don't think you can be liberated by then attaching yourself to another person again so soon. I think a lot of the reason that she gets together with Joe is that he helps to validate her and makes her feel attractive and sexy at a particular time of your life when you don't feel like that generally. We do become invisible. You hit like the 45-year age mark and suddenly nobody looks at you anymore. And to have somebody do that, and yes, okay, he's looking at her with these rose-tinted glasses, but that's what's attractive. And she knows that, and that is why that ends, because she's like, why are you interfering in these elements of my life that I didn't ask you to be there for? And yeah, it's not particularly fair on Joe, but I don't think Joe is really looking for that anyway.
I mean, he does throw the bouquet of flowers down on the porch in a bit of a tantrum. So it's like, okay, yeah, all right, maybe it was a good idea after all.
And he turns up at Christmas. It's maybe a little bit too much.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, okay, so I've kind of hopped to Stephen. I don't know if I've got a question about Oscar, just that, oh my goodness, I love him, and you made him absolutely perfect for Helen. And I think personally for me, as much as I like Tanya and as much as I love Priya's story and where it goes, I really did like Helen and Oscar, their relationship, how it went there. It was gorgeous. You've mentioned your mother. Can you tell us about your relationship with her and how it influenced the relationship between Helen and Tanya, if it did?
It had a big influence, really, because it was partly why I decided to write about those two women in the first place. And it was really more about how our views differ on certain things. So we were talking about a family issue, and my mum had a very different view to me. And that's where I thought, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because I've been brought up by this person, and you would think I would have similar views, but there's societal change and the fact that I was brought up here and not in Sri Lanka as she was, that I think quite differently. And I thought that would be quite an interesting element to explore when looking at Helen and her daughter. And I also thought that it was interesting that when you're a daughter, you do have a very fixed idea of who your mother is based on the person that you've known as you've grown up. And personally, for me, I found that there were parts of my mum I didn't know anything about that I only found out recently just by talking to her about different things. And that gave me an idea about maybe some family secrets or things that my mother's generation would have carried close to their hearts and kept quiet. And, Helen is not my mum, so the same thing that has happened to Helen didn't happen to my mum. But I know that this type of thing happens in many communities and people don't talk about it. And particularly women of that age were very much encouraged to put up with anything, really, whether that was infidelity or even domestic abuse. It was part of a marriage, particularly for Eastern marriages. And I think in some cultures that still persists in the East. So I really wanted to explore that idea of endurance in women. And I think that, again, is a very common theme across Southeast Asia and South Asia. And I think it's that endurance of everything that life has to throw at you. I was also very interested in the real strength that people like my mother have. And my mum certainly has a huge amount of strength and was very much a role model for me as I grew up. And she very much broke out of the mold of how young Sri Lankan girl was supposed to behave or the things that she was supposed to do. She actually went and became a journalist at the Ceylon Daily News when she was in her early 20s, soon after she finished university. And she was the only woman there. And so obviously she did recipes and things like that. And then she graduated to film reviews and things like that. But she was very different. And she was also hugely independent. So it was my mum who applied for the work permit to come and work here in England. And as soon as she and my dad got married, the thing she does have in common with Helen is that 6 weeks, maybe even less than 6 weeks after they got married, they got on a boat and came to England. And I think it was one of the last boats that was coming over because people started to obviously take the plane. But it was 1965 when my mum came over. So it was one of the last ones. And it was a 6-week journey from Sri Lanka to here. And then when she came here, she didn't have any family. And there were maybe a couple of people that she knew through friends of friends that she connected with. And then she built her own little community out of people who had the same experience as her and had come here. And, you know, England in the 1960s was not hugely welcoming to people of our colour. But my mum never thought of it like that. And I had made huge assumptions about her and what her life would be based on my experiences when I was younger. But my mum said to me, I grew up with a lot of British influence in my life. So my mum was educated in English. She had read all the classics. She had heard of all the food and she came here and she didn't experience the kind of culture shock I expected her to experience. She said it was all pretty normal and pretty natural for her. And she didn't even notice any racism. And I had just assumed that she would. And I think that was quite interesting for me as well. You know, I think if anything, my mum probably experienced more of it through her interactions with being my mother in the world than in her professional interactions. And she went to work for a bank when she came here. So it's a very different perspective. And I wanted to see if I could put some of that into the relationship between Helen and Tanya. It's not a very novel theme to explore, but I think it is something that resonates very much, whether you're from an immigrant family or not. I think that mother-daughter relationship is a rich theme, really, for a writer, because we have all sorts of relationships, but I think you can never really know somebody when they're your mum, you know, and the main role has been to be your mum and to bring you up. They don't tell you everything, whereas you might tell them everything. You certainly don't know what happened in their lives before you arrived. And it takes a while to get to that stage of your relationship. And I tried to really look at that really you want to see the relationship and the dynamic between Tanya and her mother change. So you can see it gradually change from one of where Helen is very much the parent and a little bit interfering with her very set ideas and values, to one where Tanya finds out what's happened to Helen during her marriage and what was really going on. And she begins to see her mother as a woman rather than just a mother. And it's an interesting almost mirror to the changes that Tanya is going through at the time as well, because she is also beginning to see herself no longer as just the mom, but as Tanya, the person. And I think that by going through that at the same time as she's discovering her mum, it changes that relationship. And I think in many ways it probably does mirror the relationship my mum and I have now. I understand her a lot better as a woman than just as my mum.
Well, I mean, your mother sounds wonderful, and my goodness, what a life story. Yeah, and interesting you say about Tanya and Helen, and Tanya thinking about Helen more, they're going through similar kind of things. Different related note, but bringing it to Helen as well, I suppose you could say. Was there an influence with Catholicism in this at all? Is there any crossover there?
Yes, I mean, there was a massive influence. There was a point where I had this discussion with my agent where she was saying, I think with Helen, it either has to be a societal thing or a shame thing related to religion, but not both. And I said, no, they're really quite intertwined. And for me, it was really important to cover the Catholicism angle, because it's very much been a part of my life. It very much dictates how my mother lives her life. And I think that religion as a whole, when people practice it, it has a massive impact on their lives. And I don't think I could have left it out. It wouldn't have given the correct idea of who these people are. And for me, it was also very important because, sadly, when you write as a person of colour, people expect you to represent every other person of colour. But I wanted to break down the homogeny, really, because we're not all the same. And, for me, partly because I was brought up as a Catholic, I didn't celebrate any Buddhist holidays that would make you sort of more Sri Lankan, in air quotes, because it wasn't part of my religion. So, I didn't really celebrate Sri Lankan New Year, or I think they call it Vesak. And I don't even know much about those things because we were Catholic. So, my whole life was built around all the festivals that every other person around me, because I went to a Catholic school as well, celebrated. So I turned out quite English. And interestingly, I was having this conversation with my son yesterday, who was saying to me, we're not very Asian, are we? And I was like, no, we're not really. And that is partly because of my mother's very English upbringing as part of the British Raj and that hangover. And then me being Catholic and her being Catholic and my dad being Catholic, we didn't really have a lot of the traditions that were brought over. And I had one Sri Lankan friend at school, and she spoke Sinhalese and she wrote as well. And that was because she went to temple every week. I don't know what day it was, but she would go to temple and they would have classes for it. And obviously that was not something that I ever experienced. So the Catholicism was a huge part of that book because it has very much shaped my more Western upbringing. And, I think when people look at me, they expect me to be very different because they think that all South Asians are exactly the same. We're all going to have the same stereotyped background that they've seen in other films, read in books, because unfortunately things that are produced are homogenized. And they're very surprised to find out that I've had a different upbringing. And so I very often get, when were you converted? And I'm like, well, I was baptized when I was 4 weeks old, actually. And, my parents are Catholic, and they can't quite get their heads around it. Less so, you don't find that with younger people, with, millennials and Gen Z. They don't care. They're not interested. But my age group, they find it very difficult to understand. So it was really important for me to put it in the book to show that there's different types of people. We're all different, just like Irish people are different to English people and Scottish people and Welsh people. We all have different customs and we think slightly differently about different things, and we're individuals. And so by placing the Catholicism front and centre of that story, I wanted to just show this a different way. There are people who are not what you think they are.
Interesting. And it's interesting, actually, that you say that people ask you when you converted. Just my own experience, obviously, it's just my experience, individual experience. But there were just so many people from different backgrounds in the Catholic Church that I went to growing up. I think in Catholicism itself, maybe, I'm saying from my experience again, it's a bit more accepted that there are lots of people all over the world that are Catholic. I don't know. Yeah.
Definitely. I think because we live in probably one of the most secular countries in the world now, don't we? Nobody asks me anymore because nobody's really interested in religion. But when I was growing up, people would ask a lot because they just all automatically assume if you're brown, you're probably Hindu or Muslim or Sikh, but they didn't really think that Catholicism or Christianity might have reached our shores, which is a bit silly, really, isn't it? Because isn't that what missionaries were all about? And that's kind of how we all ended up part of the Catholic Church. And as you say, you go to any Catholic church now, the most international place you can go to. Whereas you don't get that in the Church of England, do you? So I think that's probably where people are coming from, that idea, because the Church of England doesn't necessarily have as many nationalities represented because it is the Church of England. I think people from that background find that quite weird, how international Catholicism is. But, it's big in South Asia. It's quite a significant religion. I think even in Sri Lanka, I think it's up to 10% of Sri Lankans are Christian. It's not insignificant.
Yeah. You have got, for Tanya and also Priya, with the outburst, the racism in the workplace, microaggressions, you said in Chloe Tim's podcast, and they happen to you. And with this, obviously, we see what's going on. We've also got Tanya's problems with Stephen, where she can't eat the food or cook the food that she wants to. It's Sri Lankan and things like that. You have the outburst. The outburst, it's capitalised. Are you able to talk further about that and in its context and things like that?
I think the reason that I wanted to write about it like that is that there's often a a stereotype that's projected onto women of colour. I would say mainly on South Asian women or East Asian women generally, not so much Black women. I think Black women, they have a different stereotype placed on them. Again, nonsense. But Asian women, we're typically expected to be quiet and shy and unassuming and to just do as we're told. And I think this is sort of expected from Priya, even though she's done quite a lot to show that she's nothing like this in real life, in that she's always quite rude and abrasive and abrupt, and she will speak her mind in most situations. But we're not allowed to be angry, but particularly to show that anger and to show that disappointment. And I've had someone say to me in the workplace, I know this is really disappointing, but it's how you handle this disappointment that's going to make a difference in the future. I'm like, that's nonsense, actually, because this is just your way, again, of telling me to shut the hell up. Don't complain about what we've done to you this time. Is how you react to it. And with the inference that if you show any displeasure, any discomfort, any dismay at all at the decision they've made that has disadvantaged you, then you're not going to get any further anytime soon. And for Priya, she doesn't take any notice of any of these things. And she just loses it in the office and shouts back. And, I think in many circumstances, many of us would love to do this. And there's a big part of me still that would say it's completely unprofessional to show that side of yourself in the office. But she's had enough. And that's why I call it the outburst, because this is just pent up from years of terrible treatment, really, that she's had. Or microaggressions. What do they say? Death by 1,000 cuts. It's the same with the words that people use. And that builds up over time. And then, it's the looks, the words, the way that you're not invited to certain things and you find out other people have. And it just builds and builds and builds over the years, and it can result in an outburst like that. I mean, for Priya, it was an outburst. For me at work, it resulted in an illness and I had to take some time off work. I think so many of us have to deal with these pressures. So that's why I capitalized it, because it's a huge thing for an Asian woman to fight back or even to speak your mind. And it is something that I actually faced in the workplace, where people could not reconcile my exterior with the confidence that I would portray. And I'm not a confident person at all, but in the workplace, you have to portray that confidence. And I think people find that very difficult. You have an opinion. How? So yes, that's why I capitalized it.
No, I like that you did, because I think that just the capitals, it definitely said a lot in itself. And then you refer to it quite a lot just as the outburst, with all of the content. I know, you've just spoken there. I asked you to speak about it, but a lot of that content is in there subtly. Priya, again, I'm going to have to bring Bianca into this. I just need to, because I think the relationship, how you've got it with Priya, was a bit of a surprise at first, just because it was unexpected. I didn't know where her story was going, which is good, but just so well done. So with Bianca, she comes in and takes Priya's job, and you think, okay, well, you wonder how this is going to go. And then obviously she is great with Priya. She's really, really nice, and they get into a relationship. How far into the process, etc., was this something that you wanted to do for Priya?
That's another really good question. I think when I initially planned it, I knew that I wanted her to explore a type of relationship that she had never explored before. And I didn't really have any idea that it was going to be with another woman. It just organically happened like that. And as I wrote the two of them, it just worked. And again, this is probably another reason why I like to look at characters from the inside out. And when I wrote about them, it was just one of those times, when people say to you, oh, I just felt the characters took me somewhere. And I think that's just so pretentious. I don't believe that at all. And it happened with them. For Priya, as soon as I introduced Bianca, I thought there's got to be a spark here. There's something here. And I was really glad to move it in that direction. I was a bit worried about it because obviously I'm not from the LGBTQ community. So I did not want to step on any toes or write about things that I didn't know about. So I tried to approach it from the perspective of, how would it be if that happened to me? How would I negotiate that? And that's really the viewpoint that I took it from, because I think it's much more common for women as well to explore their sexuality, particularly for my generation at this point in our lives. I was born in the early 70s. I think when we grew up, sexuality was a very fixed thing. And we were much more accepting of homosexuality. There was no issue there, but you were either one or the other. Whereas now I notice with my children's generation, it's just much more of a spectrum. And I think that means that people of my age are exploring that a lot more. And I thought it would be great for Priya to do that, because I wanted her just to meet someone. It didn't matter whether it was a man or a woman. It's more the connection between them that mattered.
That's interesting. And I mean, you had that bit where Priya is wondering about, I think it's her cousin who's been ostracized. And I wondered if that was, I think I did a double take with it and thought, is this going to be a developing storyline? And I also thought, well, it could just also be another fact of the plot. So it was interesting to see how later in the book, Priya did find Bianca. I thought it was just a really interesting thing to have read. To kind of wrap this up, I suppose, are you able to talk about the importance of female friendships?
I think that female friendships are very important in women's lives. I'll tell you why I'm really struggling with this question, because it's not something that has a massive part in my life. I do have female friendships, but for me, my best friend is actually my husband. So I don't have that type of female friendship where I have a best mate. I have very good friends, but my best friend is the person that I share my life with. So I found that element of it probably quite challenging to write, because I don't have that kind of really close relationship with another woman. Maybe that's why I made her do what she did in the book to her best friend, because, you know, in the past I have had very close relationships with other women and it hasn't ended very well for all sorts of reasons. So yes, I did want to write about a friendship, but that wasn't the impetus. So that's quite a difficult question for me to answer, because I don't think I'm well qualified to talk about the importance of female friendships. And part of it as well is that, you know, when I got married, I found out that I was infertile and I went through fertility treatment. And during that time, I think that's in my author's note as well, we'd lost lots of friends. I lost a lot of friends. There were people just disappeared out of my life who had been really close friends of mine. So yeah, I haven't got that. And, you know, I think nowadays, probably my closest friends are my writer friends that I've met in recent years. And there is something to being a writer and connecting with other writers, because you tend to put your heart and soul on the page in some way or other. And I think that is irrespective of the genre that you write. So I think thriller writers do it as much as women's fiction writer does. And because of that, I think the way that we interact in our friendships is a lot deeper than I probably would have done with many of the people that I met face to face. I'm a lot less inclined to tell them the type of things that I would be telling, for instance, the other mentees on the Madeline Milburn mentorship. And I think writing gives you that mutual trust and a safe space that I haven't had for a long time, actually. So I haven't had the kind of friendship that I've had from where I've had a friend from the age of 4. I haven't had that. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's the infertility, but also there's the fact that I'm a brown person who's been brought up in a very majority white country, because I'm from a Sri Lankan background. There's not masses of Sri Lankans in the UK. And my mum's friends typically lived quite far away from us. So there was no one, even locally, that I would go hang out with or speak to. So there was no one there going through the same kind of thing as me. And so what I have found as I've grown up is that, gosh, getting a bit deep here, is that in the friendships that I've had, I find that as people shrink their circle, I'm the one that falls off, because I'm the one that they don't see as being one of them. And that's what's happened over time, I think. You know, you find out that they've all been having dinners together and I've been left out. And I think, well, why is that? Oh, okay, that's why. And that is something from my generation. I don't see it at all in the younger generations. They just don't have it. But, at the time that I grew up, it was a very white country. It was a time that it was okay to have people like Jim Davidson on the TV.
Yeah.
But it's just a very different time. But the people that have been my friends have been brought up in that time, and it is only natural that I'm the one that falls out when their friendships become closer, because they don't see me as being the same. Again, going back to what you were saying about Stephen and how you didn't like him, but, people are human beings. We all make mistakes and we don't always do the right thing. And Priya doesn't do the right thing either. She shouldn't be punished less than him. And Tali manages to forgive her.
I like that she did forgive Priya.
Yes.
Yeah, what you said about female friendship and not having someone, I mean, it took me until 3 years ago. I am younger than you, but it took me until 3 years ago before I had a close friend. Hi, she's probably listening. But I think it's one of those things where it's never too late. And it happens, people say about, love, it's never too late, and this is never too late. But I think with friendship, it's never too late as well.
Yeah, it does take a while, and it does take a lot of trust. I think that's the biggest part here. It's trust. And I mean, for me, it sounds weird to say this, but those 5 other women on the menteeship that joined at the same time, they're very much people that I would go to with a lot of issues. We've become very close, and we don't even meet, but they know a lot about me and vice versa just from that. And then, I have made some friends as I've been older, and lots of people say, often it's the friends that you've had all your life where they're the strongest. But sometimes when you've changed as a person, getting to know someone when you're older is a richer experience because they know you as you are now.
Yeah, definitely. I want to touch on something that's possibly difficult. I know we've done that already, but you said about having lost friends around the time of your fertility problems, IVF.
Yeah.
Did you lose them due to the IVF effectively? Were they staying away while you were doing that?
I think they just found it very difficult to understand what was going on. And I still saw them, but my husband and I felt we were very much in it on our own. And there were times when we were going through a cycle of IVF. There was a time when we were going through that, and we went to someone's party, and I had to have my injection, and my husband was like in the bathroom giving me an injection, and someone came in, and it was a big joke. And yeah, okay, it's great for everyone to have a laugh about it, but IVF it's not just physically draining, it's emotionally exhausting. And that's all wrapped up in this desperate need to have a baby with this person that you love. And a lot of people didn't understand that. And then, when it goes on for a bit, people just lose interest, as with everything, and I think unless you're in it, it's very difficult. So I had a good friend who we were incredibly close. And then once I got married and started going through all of this, she disappeared and she reappeared again once I had my son. And she was like, oh, I love him to bits. And I'm like, how? You weren't there for 4 years when I went through all of this, when I was crying or when I had general anesthetics and I was in hospital, and you weren't there. And I think it is very difficult for some people, and I don't judge them. It wasn't me that ended those friendships. It's people who just drift away, because I don't like to judge people on those things because everybody has stuff going on in their lives. But yeah, it was a very difficult time. I think the IVF distanced me more. I think people thought that I was focusing more on my marriage than my friendships, and that's probably true because it was a very testing time for us as a couple as well. Yeah, I mean, I did lose a lot of friendships. There's one of my friends that I've had since the first day we started work in 1994, and we're still very good friends. We're not in and out of each other's houses. We don't see each other regularly, but I know if anything happened, I could pick up the phone and she would be here in an instant. But yeah, that was probably it. So everybody else just kind of drifted away. And I think at the time that we were going through it, I got married quite young compared to the rest of my friends. I had just turned 28 and most of my friends still weren't married. So they weren't even thinking about the things that I was thinking about. And I only went to see the doctor because I thought, well, who knows what's going on here? I need to just get myself checked out, and found out that I was infertile. And that was when I was 28. So I think a lot of it is that they were at a very different stage of their lives and going through something different to me. And here I was going through this quite grown up problem at a fairly young age. So I think that also added to that lack of understanding. And then it's quite interesting. I have had another friend who went through fertility issues much later in life. And then she wanted to talk to me. And, that's fair enough. But where were you when I needed that? And so, yeah, life is a bit complicated, isn't it? Friendships can be very complicated. And that, I suppose, in a very roundabout way, is why I wanted to write about Priya and Tanya the way I did, because friendships are complicated and you can't judge based on one thing, and you have to forgive and you have to move on in life. And maybe that is the Catholic in me that is saying that, because nobody's perfect,
Mm-hmm. And we reiterate, you have been successful effectively. You have 2 sons, I believe.
I have, yes. I do look at my older son now and think I take this for granted, the heartache and the persistence for 4 years. It was really tough. And I have so much sympathy for anybody going through any of these issues, fertility, adoption, all of those things, where that desperate need to share your life with children. And yeah, I am very lucky. I've got 2 lovely boys, adults almost now. One is almost 18. So I'll have 2 adult children now. And I can't believe that. I'm incredibly fortunate, very fortunate.
That's wonderful. Oh, we'll move on to something less deep.
Yeah, my book is actually very light in comparison to honestly, it's a feel-good read, yeah.
No, that's a very good point. So, go on, what's next? I'm excited to hear about this.
Yeah, so it's been quite an interesting process because I had to deliver a manuscript by the end of last year. And full disclosure, I did deliver and they didn't like it. And to be entirely honest about the whole thing, it was right that they didn't like it, because even while I was writing it, I felt like the characters weren't fully developed. And because the characters weren't fully developed, they were being driven by the plot. And I had set myself up by submitting really an idea with the first book. And I stuck to it, and I shouldn't have. And I have learned a lot through this whole process of how I create. So I have another book that's in the inception stages. I'm still thinking about the characters, because that was really what was lacking in the last manuscript. I did a great plot, brilliant plot. Didn't quite work there with the characters that I had. And so for me, the plot will always come from the character. And I have a very good idea of where I want to take it. It's quite different. It's different, and yet it's the same. It's still an older woman. It's still an interracial relationship. It still has quirky family members butting in and interfering. And it will have all of those elements that are in the first book, but a different kind of story. There will always be romance and a happy ending in my books, because that's what I like writing. You will never find me writing more angst-driven things that have open endings and so on, because that's not what I enjoy writing. It doesn't mean I don't enjoy reading those. I love reading every type of book. I
am definitely far more excited than I would have been, obviously, knowing now. No, that's really interesting. Ronali, this has been lovely having you on. It's just been absolutely fantastic. So excited about this next one. Hurry up on it, please. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Charlie. I've had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening. Please do share this episode with anyone you think would be interested in it. The Wormhole Podcast, episode 75, was recorded on the 7th and 21st of May and published on the 22nd of May, 2023. Music and production by Charlie Place, with a big thank you to Ronali Collings.